Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for returning for another segment of Health Professional Radio. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Ira Spector. He's joining us here as co-founder and CEO of SFA Therapeutics. He's going to talk about the company's development of a novel platform to treat chronic inflammation-mediated diseases that utilize metabolites formed in the microbiome. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Spector.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Give us a little bit of insight into your professional background and talk briefly about your role as CEO of SFA Therapeutics.
Well, I have degrees in physics, electrical engineering, an MBA, and a PhD in clinical health sciences, which is epidemiology and biostatistics. I've been in drug development and device development for over 35 years, and I found this technology at Temple University in 2015 and challenged the original inventors to show me that it worked in a human model. I'd seen the animal models, which were transgenic, using humanized animals, and they were very impressive. But I realized that I've seen many things work in animals that then didn't translate to humans. So I challenged them to show me that there was a signal in humans. A year later, they brought me back to the lab and showed me those data. And I realized also that they had a platform technology that could be applied to a number of diseases. And we formed the company to exploit and develop those findings. And we think they're rather novel and unique. I worked on 34 approved drugs in the past, and I've never seen anything like this, which is why I'm so excited about what we're doing.
Well, if you would, describe to us what the microbiome is. What are the recent advancements in the field as research into the microbiome has become pretty popular recently?
So let me try and simplify things. The microbiome is simply a thin layer of bacteria and cells that exist wherever the human body interacts with the external world. So there's a skin microbiome, a GI microbiome, a urinary microbiome, a oral microbiome, a respiratory microbiome. And in those microbiomes, there are literally millions of cells and bacteria that for years were underexplored and misunderstood. And we actually feel, based on our discoveries, that they have a very important role in the GI, at least, in modulating the immune system. And it's that discovery that we're exploiting to turn into small molecule drugs. Now, there have been other attempts to develop treatments out of the microbiome. We call ourselves a fourth generation microbiome company. What do I mean by that? The original companies in the microbiome were doing something called fecal transplant. And there was recently an approval by the FDA for a company that does that, aimed at treating a difficult disease called C. diff. The second generation companies were doing prebiotics. The difficulty with those is it's very difficult to show they have much of an effect. Third generation companies were doing bacteria. The problem with giving people bacteria is it's almost personalized medicine, because now you have to figure out what bacteria someone has, which means sequencing them, and then figure out what's missing. And by the way, depending upon their diet or alcohol consumption, that can change from day to day. We're a fourth generation company. What we've discovered is that there are substances made in your GI microbiome that regulate the immune system. The problem is they have exquisitely short half-lives. They don't stick around in the body for very long. We have figured out how to turn those into drugs. And just like insulin was revolutionary in treating type 1 diabetics because their bodies can't make it, we feel that there are patients who have certain autoimmune diseases who also have GI issues who don't make these substances. And if we treat them as a drug and provide them exogenously, we can show a profound effect. So that's the basis for what we're doing.
Now, I understand that you're developing therapies, of course, derived from the microbiome to address autoimmune conditions. What makes your approach unique compared to current therapeutic modalities that are already out there?
So the current state of the art for treating autoimmune disease is immunosuppression. Basically, knocking the immune system down to treat the symptoms. And I worked on one of those drugs, Enbrel, which you sometimes see on TV at night. And I was also there when we had the first cases of TB and the first cases of cancers occurring. If you listen carefully to the ads on TV for those drugs, half the ad is the side effects that can occur. So immunosuppression as a class brings with it a lot of side effects. We're doing something very different. We're calling it immunomodulation, which is changing the immune system by returning it to normal levels, creating homeostasis in the immune system. And by doing that, we're planning to not immunosuppress, not have the side effect baggage of the current classes of drugs, and yet reduce the issues that these patients suffer. The autoimmune disease is essentially the body's immune system attacking the body. And by tamping down the cytokines or messengers that control the immune system to normal levels, we think we can completely change the way this disease is treated.
Now, I understand that your lead program, SFA 002, is being investigated now in a phase 1B study for patients with psoriasis. What about the progress that you've made in development, and what's coming up next for that compound?
So psoriasis is a stalking horse. It's a proof of concept model. Our drug downregulates 4 very well understood cytokines, which are essentially messengers or signals in the body for inflammation. We downregulate TNF-alpha, we downregulate IL-17, we downregulate IL-23, and we downregulate interferon gamma. If you look at those 4 cytokines and you match them up with other diseases, something we've done, we stopped counting after 25 diseases. If it works in psoriasis, it has a high probability of working in psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, lupus, and a host of other autoimmune diseases. But what's very different from this and other treatments is that in many cases, patients have more than one autoimmune disease simultaneously. Patients present with so-called clusters of autoimmune disease, and they're often treated as different diseases. So they'll see a rheumatologist for RA, they'll see a dermatologist for psoriasis. Our thesis is that perhaps they're all related to the same defect in the GI microbiome, and by providing this as a drug, you get to treat all of these diseases with a single approach. And further, what we've seen in our phase 1A trial of 6 subjects is we saw all 6 subjects, by the way, showed a significant response. But we saw 2 patients who, after being on treatment for a year, were taken off of treatment and had no relapse and no recurrence of symptoms, meaning they're free of disease for over a year and a half post-treatment. That is not something you see with immunosuppressants. That is not something you see with current drugs. And that's something we're going to be exploring in our phase 1B study of 30 subjects. And then in phase 2, when we look at 75 subjects, we're going to be exploring how many subjects can show a durable response, which is something that's never been seen with current treatments. And that's why our vision is really to change the way medical practice is approached by treating what we believe is a root cause of autoimmune disease.
SFA's pipeline is wide-reaching, and you have other assets that you're developing. Where can listeners go to learn more about SFA Therapeutics?
They can go to www.sfatherapeutics.com. And if they do that, they'll learn that our very first drug was targeted to blocking the progression of hepatitis B to liver cancer. That's a slow-growing disease, so we focused on something that's quicker, SFA 002 in autoimmune disease with psoriasis as the first indication. We also have a drug, SFA 001N, for NASH and fibrosis that we expect to have in its first clinical trials in the first quarter of 2023. We've been looking at 003 for bullous pemphigoid, a rare and sometimes fatal skin disease, 004 for uveitis, a disease that causes blindness in 200,000 people per year, 005 to prevent relapse recurrence of CLL and AML, the two most prevalent forms of leukemia, and 006 for long COVID syndrome. So we've got a broad range of potential treatments in their areas of serious unmet need.
Dr. Spector, I appreciate you joining us here on Health Professional Radio. Lots of great information, and I'm hoping that you'll return and tell us more about these compounds as they go through their developmental processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Ira Spector. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.